Virus 13, Chapter 43. How long is this quarantine going to last? Linda exhaled in frustration inside her biohazard suit after hearing the woman's voice in her earpiece. After being locked down in the level 4 labs for the past few days, Linda's co-worker was getting edgy. Linda leaned back in her office chair. I have no idea, Kim. You know as well as I do that these things take some time. I haven't seen the sun in days. I need to get out of here before I stick this pip-pap in my eye. Ow, my ears. No need to yell, Kim. You're using a radio. I can hear you perfectly fine. Just relax. We're quarantined. There's nothing we can do about it. Kim snorted in frustration. What are the reasons for the quarantine again? We've had no accidents down here. Everything is fine. Perhaps one of the lab sensors is faulty. It wouldn't be the first time we had a false alarm. Remember when the sensors falsely detected the airborne herpes virus in the air system? People were trapped down here for days. We just have to be patient and continue working on this vaccine. Ah! Kim cried. Linda returned her attention to the computer screen. She waved a gloved finger across it to turn to the next page. Instead of looking at the latest test results for the vaccine, she was reading Brave New World for the umpteenth time to ward off complete boredom. Sorry about that, guys. She was halfway down the page when she heard the characteristic beep of the airlock. Odd considering they were under lockdown. On cue, the radio crackled to life again. Someone is in the airlock, Kim exclaimed over the radio. Linda swirled around in her chair. Perplexed, she stared at the large steel door, waiting for something to happen. When the door finally popped open, Linda felt the pressure in the room change. The papers on her wall fluttered briefly in a newly created breeze. She gasped when an unmistakable form of Ari strode into the room. The slender body of Savara hung at his side. They were both soaking wet from the airlock's decontamination shower. Linda was stunned, but it only took a second to realize what was going on here. Classic human themes of love and betrayal. Following them was a man in a drenched business suit. He had a thick mustache and a bulging stomach, giving him the look of a detective from a cheesy police movie. She was almost certain he was with Homeland. There could be no other explanation. None of them were wearing biohazard suits, and they had left both airlock doors wide open. Whatever bugs that were floating around in the room were now free to roam the corridors. Kim boldly ran toward the group of intruders, screaming, Ari, what do you think you're doing here? You're not wearing any suits. You left the airlock doors. The woman's voice was cut off when Ari planted his thick boot into her stomach. With his arms busy holding up Savara, he elected to give Kim a swift high kick to get her out of his way. A tiny woman was launched backward, toppling over the lab bench and disappearing over the opposite side. This sent the rest of the lab workers scurrying into their offices, slamming the doors behind them. Calmly, Linda stood up and walked out into the lab area. Ari, what the hell are you doing? I'm here for the vaccine. The real one. She needs it, Ari snarled. The giant was clearly very pissed off. Linda could see the rabid look in his eyes as he looked over Savara's shivering figure. Linda inspected Savara more closely. The woman was obviously in the earlier stages of the viral infection. It was hard to tell if she was sweating profusely or if it was just water from the decontamination shower that soaked her blouse. The amount of heat coming off both of them was impressive. Linda could feel it from a yard away. Ari repeated himself. This time there was a disconcerting crack in his voice. I need that vaccine now. We aren't done with it yet, Ari. Shut up and give me the real vaccine. He bellowed. Don't play games with me. The real vaccine? I have no idea what you are talking about. Like I said, we are not done making it yet. You're lying. Give me the one my father used. Ari took Savara's arm off his shoulder and made a long stride toward Linda. He brought the back of one of his big hands across the hood of her suit, hitting her like a boat paddle. The momentum of the blow lifted her off her feet. She hit the ground hard and lay there groaning and holding the side of her face. Slowly, she stood back up with a look of disheveled pride. Fine, Aubrey said, eyeing him angrily. You want a vaccine? Linda walked over to a large fridge in the back of the lab and opened it. She pulled out a small glass vial and a syringe. She tipped the vial up and stuck a needle in, pulling back the plunger. The clear liquid rushed into the syringe. I'm afraid there's only enough for one dose, she said, blowing a glance over to the Homeland agent standing motionless behind Aubrey. Give it to me, Aubrey demanded. Matt looked at Aubrey in protest. Desperate thoughts ran through his mind, converging on a small syringe that Linda was holding. He knew it was his only chance for survival. Linda saw the look on the agent's face. Her ploy had worked. Arya was moving toward Linda when she heard Matt's voice from behind him. Don't move. Arya put his hands in the air and slowly turned around. Matt had drawn his taser. This is a really bad idea, Arya said coldly. Just give me the vaccine. Arya stood motionless, glaring at Mac. Go on, Linda. Give it to him. Hesitantly, she walked over, keeping one eye on Arya. She placed the syringe into Matt's open palm and quickly backed away. Matt glanced the vaccine to his chest. He felt a brief sense of comfort radiate from the syringe, and wouldn't last. The reality of the situation was that he was still locked in the building with a very violent and increasingly frantic man who would have no trouble killing him. I'm sorry. I have a family. I need this vaccine. Arya remained silent and motionless like a tiger ready to pounce. The man fumed with anger like heat ripping off desert asphalt. Matt knew the only way to safely inject himself without being attacked was to get out of the lab. The taser in his hands trembled as he slowly backed up. Matt was almost to the door when there was an inexplicable blur of motion. A glass flash rocketed through the air and struck the retreating agent in the temple. It shattered over Matt's head, causing him to grunt in pain as sparkling shards sprinkled down around him. He collapsed to the ground. When he touched the side of his head, his fingers came away sticky and warm with blood. Everyone turned to see where the flash had come from, but there was nobody there, just an empty lab. The distraction was enough. Taking advantage of the situation, Arya raised his gun. Bang, bang, bang. Linda screamed. The 3 gunshots tore through Matt's chest. Thoroughly baffled, Matt wrenched back in pain. The blood ran down his white shirt and he made a strange gurgling sound, giving one last pained look to the side of the room where the glass had come from. His confused eyes caught Linda's as he fell backward. Matt's body lay motionless in a river of broken glass and blood. Ari smirked, sweeping his gun back toward the side of the lab where the glass bottle had come from. Come out, Ari said playfully. I believe we have a stowaway on this ship, Linda. Which one of your lab rats is out there? The little woman I kicked earlier? Show yourself, Ari yelled. He carefully inched toward the end of the lab bench where the dead agent lay. He quickly glanced down and discovered that the syringe was gone. Ari briefly panicked. Did the agent drop the syringe? Did it lie all with the other broken glass on the ground? He bent down and desperately searched among remnants of the flask for signs of the needle. Nothing. With one foot, he stepped onto Matt's lifeless body, using him as a stepping stone across the expanding red tributary below. When he shifted his weight to the man's body, the room filled with the sickening crack of bones. He needed to find the person who threw that flask. Maybe they had managed to grab the syringe as the agent fell. Watching Arya unceremoniously step on the agent made Linda feel ill. She heard the sick snapping sound of breaking bones underneath Arya's heavy boot. Arya stalked down the row of lab benches with the silent grace of a predator. Linda saw the movement first, another flurry of motion above the body of the agent, and something strange happened. The agent's hand opened up, and his taser floated upward as if by magic. The air above the body wavered. She gasped. Arya whipped around just in time to see the taser hovering in the air, pointed right at him. Then he saw it. The faint outline of a man, the taser in one hand, and the other the syringe. It was hard to make out, but he could see the distortions in the air, created by the man's presence. A hush fell over the lab. Without warning, Arya lunged. The invisible man managed to squeeze off a shot. The pawns caught Arya in the thigh. Linda took the opportunity to hide underneath her lab bench, covering her head with her arms. Despite the electricity coursing through his body, Ari miraculously managed to reach down with his violently shaking hands and whipped out the taser palms. He popped up behind the lab bench with his pistol drawn. Fuck. He cursed as he panted for breath. The man had disappeared again. Ari forced himself to control his breathing. The lad grew quiet as he listened intently for any sound that may give away his camouflaged prey. The crunch of glass a few yards away drew his attention. Ari shot in the direction of the sound. To avoid the bullets, the chameleon was forced to dive to the ground. Miscalculating the landing, he ended up rolling through the dark pool of blood and glass, painted a streak red down his side. With his skin marked with blood, he was no longer invisible. He swiftly took cover behind the opposite side of the bench from Ari. From the safety of the lab bench, Agent Monroy materialized out of thin air. He gently laid the syringe down and then launched himself over the bench toward Ari. In mid-air, his skin flashed red, transforming him into a bloody naked flash, rifling through the air. He slammed into Ari, who was momentarily caught off guard by the sight of a color-changing nude man flying toward him. Ari stumbled back from the blow, but managed to grab the chameleon, and using his momentum, flung the man over his shoulders like a rag doll. Monroy grunted in pain as he crashed through the glass door of a fridge. His skin flickered, bright yellow, and red as he tumbled to the ground. Ari slowly approached, looking amused. Monroy's skin changed back to brown. He groaned and tried to push himself up. The broken glass around him sliced into his hands. Blood dribbled out of his palms, causing him to collapse back down in pain. This was it, he briefly thought. His tortured life had finally found itself a suitable end, an excruciatingly painful one. Monroy's pessimistic thoughts were directed elsewhere, when another deafening gunshot split his hand open in a burst of blood. He looked down at the mangled mess that moments before had been his right hand. He wailed in agony and rolled over onto his back, clenching his destroyed hand and his good one. Jagged squares of glass on the ground dug into his back, leaving red smears on the white tiled floor. His skin began to flare a wide spectrum of colors as he screamed in distress: red, yellow, green, blue. He was boiling with color. "What the fuck are you?" asked Ari as he aimed his gun at Monroy's forehead. Monroy didn't have a chance to answer before Ari pulled the trigger. Click. Ari's sight. The gun was empty. Carefully, he locked the barrel of the gun. He looked at the naked man on the floor one more time before slamming the butt of the gun down to the man's forehead. The skin of Monroy's face flashed bright white as the handle of the gun crashed against his skull, causing his head to snap back hard against the ground. The chameleon's skin paused for several seconds and then slowly faded back to brown. Ari dropped the gun onto the body and walked back towards the revolver. He bent down and scooped the syringe off the floor. Ari uncapped the syringe. The tiny instrument looked awkward in his thick hands. He gently lifted the survivor up and laid her down on the top of a bench, carefully sticking the needle into one of her slight shoulders. When he pushed the plunger down, the clear serum slowly disappeared into her. He sat down the needle on the lab bench and stepped back, watching the survivor in silence. Linda crawled out from underneath the lab bench and looked around at all of the destruction. Her lab was total. Shattered glass littered the floor. Blood seeped out of the lifeless bodies of the two men shown on the ground. The only audible sounds in the lab were the labored breathing of Savara, the muffled cries of Kim sobbing in her office, and the heavy breathing of the monstrous Ari. Ari picked up Savara's hand and squeezed it tightly. It looked like he had fallen into a trance-like state as he stared down at her, breathing slowly. His lips were moving, but no sound came out. Ari desperately needed Savara to survive. When he first agreed to his father's plan, he had barely known the woman. But as the months went by, he had become invariably attached, willing to do anything for her. His father hadn't understood. Nothing that man did was for love. That intangible, immeasurable emotion warranted no merit. In his father's opinion, it was always science, science, science. Fear and love were once foreign emotions for Ari. But now he was caught between both with no idea what to do. Suddenly, Savara started to shake. "What's happening?" Ari growled. The woman's shaking became a full-out seizure. She convulsed violently and white froth started to bubble out the sides of her mouth. Her eyes rolled up into the back of her head. Ari's face flushed. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he held Savara down to stop her from falling off the lab bench. "What's happening, Linda?" he yelled again. "Stay with me, Savara. Stay with me, please." After one final jar, Savara lay deathly still. Her tongue hung loosely from her flat jaw. Ollie whimpered. After a minute he put his finger to Savara's neck to feel for the vitamin pulse that he knew would not be there. He screamed aloud before burying his face into her stomach and beginning to sob. Ollie made a series of unintelligible, muted cries until he had exhausted his vocal cords. He lifted himself up and wiped away tears from his red eyes. Snot dripped down his nose as he faced Linda with a crazy, violent look in his eyes. "What did you do?" Linda's face no longer showed any hint of fear, her expression callous and cold. One of her hands snaked behind her to find the suit's zipper. She unzipped herself. The cold lab air rushed in. Ollie waited as she shimmied her upper torso out of the suit. She wore an old white tank top underneath. It was against policy to wear it under the suit, but she considered the tank lucky and wore it anyway. She looked at him dead in the eye. "How dare you, Arya, betray your own father? This our entire plan because of your own damn selfishness." Arya blinked in confusion. "What? We all worked far too long and hard on this for you to back out now." "Each one of us knew the sacrifices we would have to make. You disgust me," she said. "What did you do?" Linda laughed. "You idiot. Who do you think made these viruses in the first place?" Looking down at Savara, Arya realized the truth. He repeated angrily, "What did you do?" Nodding, Linda laughed to herself. "I told your father and over again that you and Savara couldn't be trusted." Rage started to build in Arya like an approaching hurricane. He screamed, "What did you give her? What was in that vial? Tell me." Linda stood confidently as Arya approached, bracing for the oncoming assault. "You wanted a cure? Well, the only cure for my viruses is death. That needle was filled with a lethal neurotoxin. You bitch." He picked up a glass beaker from the lab bench and took a giant step toward her. Linda lunged forward with a scream, brandishing another syringe full of the neurotoxin like a dagger. But Arya was too quick for her. He dodged the needle and smashed the beaker over her head. She crumpled to the ground like a bag of potatoes. "You killed her, damn you." Arya cried, "I'm going to fucking tear you apart." He picked her up by the back of the neck, his hand easily fitting all the way around her skinny throat, and flung her over the lab bench. Her body crashed sideways through stacks of glass equipment and test tubes. Linda yelped in agony as she landed on the other side, glass raining down around her. Blood trickled down her hands and forearms as she screamed to get up. Before she could get her footing, Arya grabbed both her legs in his vest-like grip. She made a feeble attempt to kick his hands off, but he was too strong. Using all of his weight, he swung her into another nearby fridge. The glass door exploded as she went straight through it, cutting deep lacerations up and down her thigh back like strips of cloth. Ollie didn't let go. Again he swung her at the lab bench, sending her hurling over it, back to the floor on the other side. Linda lay bruised and bleeding in the fatal position. She cried softly, scanning the lab bench for a good blunt object. Ollie picked up another thick glass beaker and slowly approached. He reached in his pants pocket, pulled out something, and threw it down in front of Linda's face. "Send my regards to my father, you whore." She shrank when she saw the human thumb, lonely, pale, and indeed a long, long way from home. Ollie felt like his chest had been replaced by an angry furnace. He prepared to bring the glass down with blind fury upon Linda's blood-soaked head. He raised his hand for the final blow. Bang! Ollie's face contorted in pain. He looked back behind to see that a bullet hole had appeared in the back of his shoulder. Blood gushed from the wound. James stood in the open airlock, weapon in hand, doing his best to keep the gun steady, but his hands were trembling almost uncontrollably. When Ollie turned around, James' stomach flipped over at the sight of a man possessed. Great veins snaked up and down both sides of Ollie's neck, and his fierce eyes were blood red. "James!" Ollie snorted as he broke into a sprint. He was headed straight at James, the blunted weapon of a glass bottle clenched in his right hand. The fear was paralyzing. James froze. His fingers felt like they weighed 100 pounds. The gun trigger felt impossible to squeeze. In a few seconds, the maniac blew down into him to death with a piece of goddamn laboratory equipment. A fitting end for scientists, he thought. Then a bloody hole split open in Ollie's white thigh. For a moment, James was stunned. His fingers had worked. The bullet didn't slow Ollie down, though. The man still thundered toward him, dragging his wounded leg. James pulled the trigger again and again. This time, the bullets hit within inches of each other on the left side of Arya's chest. Blood spilled out of holes like Old Faithful. Arya grunted in pain, but the shots didn't stop his momentum. He was only a step away. James felt like he would have more success shooting down a charging grizzly bear than this mad man who was about to bring down the glass bottle onto his already wounded head. Aiming wildly, James held his breath and squeezed the trigger one more time. Something hot sprayed his face, realizing that he had closed his eyes. James opened them to a beautiful sight. The last bullet had caught Arya right between his engorged, hate-filled eyes. Arya had been so close that blood was splattered all over James' face. He watched Arya's head jerk back, his body suddenly going limp. Sidestepping, James barely managing to dodge the fallen giant, who landed with a splash of blood on the floor. James' hands were still shaking when he dropped the gun. "Wow!" cried James inwardly. Unexpectedly, Arya's big hand clamped over his ankle. Unaware that his vocal cords could reach such heights, James let out a high-pitched scream that would make a 13-year-old girl blush. In alarm, he fell backward onto his butt and proceeded to kick Arya in the head repeatedly until the hand released him and became flaccid. Swimming up to his feet, James tried to shake off the shock. His whole body quivered. Carefully, he stepped over the collection of dead bodies on the laboratory floor, making sure to stay out of Hannah's reach just in case. His wife was still stretched out on the ground, moaning and clutching her various injuries. He knelt down next to her. "It's okay. Arya's dead. You're safe. I'm so glad you're safe. I was so scared." She whimpered in pain as James put his arms under her and lifted her up. "I'm going to get you out of here. We need to get you some help." Her hand squeezed his arm weakly.